Yeah, yeah. You know, once I was reading, this is related to some extent to your question. I was reading the memoirs of a composer, a musician. And this person is both a composer and a kind of a philosopher. And this memoir is a very philosophical memoir. It's called All Those Times Without Memory, something like that. The English translation, I can't really recall. But he had these tricks. He said that once he was on a train, and in the train there was a family. I think there was a mother and children who were sitting in front of him, and they asked him what love is. What is love, or something like that. And he said that he was sleepy. He wanted to get back to his taking a nap. So he wanted to just give them a deep sounding, an answer that sounds deep, that satisfies them with its apparent depth, but just get rid of them. He said, I always use this trick. I say, I don't know, sometimes I think that love is not an answer, but a question. And you can say that about anything. He said that was my trick. If I wanted to sound philosophical, I always said, oh, okay, tell me anything, like tea. You know, sometimes I think that drinking tea is not really an answer. It's more like a question. Okay, it didn't work with that. But you can work it with like things like abstract concepts, like life is a question, or desire is a question, not an answer, or happiness is a question, sadness. What is sadness? Is sadness an answer, or is it a question? So people who want to sound deep, they usually develop these patterns, and these patterns are repeated. Like you detect these patterns in the way they talk. They fall back down into the patterns, as opposed to beginning with the patterns and then giving rise to new forms of thinking. You know, that's the difference between somebody who's actually really thinking and somebody who's pretending to be thinking. Somebody who's pretending to be thinking begins in some way and then falls back into recognizable, repeated, familiar patterns, and then they stop there. They stop at that end point. Like philosophy is concerned with asking questions, not giving answers. And then they stop. That means, because it's not the first time that anybody is saying that. It's a kitsch moment. It's a moment that has been repeated and it generates some emotion because it is familiar, and then they stop there. But a person who is really interested in thinking begins with that recognizable pattern and then moves in a way that is relatively new, tries to explore, but again, getting away from what is familiar, getting away from what has been said before. There's a reason why people, quote someone. They quote a famous person in the beginning, and then they write or talk. I just read that terrible little book by Philip Roth called The Breast, and the whole book is just, I don't know, maybe I should read it again. But at the end of the book, he writes a poem by Rilke, and says, I gave you this story just to help you make sense of this poem. It's like, I could read the poem by myself. I don't need your novel, your terrible novel. So yeah, okay, let's get back to the question. How to sound deep. This is a very mischievous question. Of course, we don't want to help people like that, but people like that end up helping themselves. And as long as we have people who are easy to impress, people who rely on how they feel to judge something. If your audience relies on their feeling to judge you, then you can always get away with sounding deep and sounding philosophical, because people aren't just using their emotions, and they're not really judging you using their faculty of judgment. So to sound deep, I would say maybe evoke some feeling, some emotion. Talk about how deep it is, how Lady Philosophy expects so much from us. Wow. Yeah. And quote a lot of people, like these one-liners, like Wittgenstein, the limits of my language is the limits of my world. Like people like just get away with just saying things like that and sounding deep. I'm sure it fulfills some purpose. Maybe they can like find a girlfriend or a boyfriend. They find like romantic companions, and that it might work in some cases. It might impress your friends or the person who was interviewing you for a job. But obviously it is not, I mean, it seems to me it's very different from what philosophers are actually interested in. Philosophy and art isn't interested in quickly making an impression, making a positive impression quick. That's a salesmanship. A salesperson does that. It's interested in that. Quick, just get in, make the sale and get out. You know, I heard somebody say, if you want to sell your courses, your philosophy courses online, you should do a live stream. Get in, do your live stream, the sales will go up. Yeah, so that is, philosophers are relying on these non-philosophical techniques. But again, it's not, we don't want to say that it's bad or it's unethical. People need to make a living. What is important is to distinguish sounding deep, sounding philosophical, and being philosophical. And remembering that there's a potential for tension and misalignments. There's misalignment and conflict between a philosopher's aims and the aims of a salesperson, the aims of somebody who wants to make a positive impression, make friends, and influence people. That's one set of aims, and philosophers' aims are not. Philosophers' aims are relatively disturbing, demanding a lot of work from us for very uncertain outcomes, very non-practical outcomes. So it's a good question. Thank you. I'm glad you asked that. Thanks.